Margaret Cole, 59 years old, and I thought I had already lived through the hardest moment of my life the night I became a widow. But nothing prepared me for the message that lit up my phone at 3:07 in the dark of my tiny apartment. While the winter wind scraped against the windows like something trying to get in, I remember sitting up, confused, my heart beating just fast enough to tell me something was wrong. My daughter Jenna never texted at that hour. She was a nurse, always exhausted, always careful. When I opened her message, the brightness of the screen hit me first, then the words, "Mom, Linda doesn't feel comfortable having you at Christmas this year. It's better if you don't come. Please understand." For a moment, I thought it had to be some kind of mistake. I rubbed my eyes, read it again, then again. The room around me felt smaller with every reread, as if the walls were quietly closing in. I looked over at the framed photo on my nightstand, Jenna and her husband Mark, standing in front of the house they loved so much, the house I paid $280,000 for, the house where I wasn't welcome for Christmas. Something in me went very still. Not angry, not yet, just stunned. The kind of stunned that shakes your faith in what you thought your own child would never do. And right there, in that cold December silence, something in my life shifted, so quietly it was almost a whisper. When morning finally came, I didn't make coffee right away. I just sat at the edge of my bed, feeling the weight of the night still clinging to me like cold air that refused to leave. I kept seeing Jenna's message on that glowing screen. Even after hours of trying to make sense of it, it still felt unreal, like a dream that stayed behind even after you opened your eyes. I didn't tell anyone about the message. I didn't tell my sister or my neighbor or the women in my book club. Shame has a strange way of making silence feel like the safest choice. Instead, I got dressed slowly, pulled on the same thick sweater I'd worn for years, and let myself move on autopilot, as if my body knew what to do while my mind was still trying to catch up. Driving to work, I kept noticing things I normally didn't: the frost on the grass, the gray sky hanging low, the weight of December pressing on every rooftop. It reminded me too much of winters years ago, when it was just me and Jenna against the world. When she was 15, it was only the two of us in a narrow rental house that smelled faintly of old carpet and lemon cleaner. I used to come home from my second job, dropping my purse on the kitchen table, finding her hunched over homework with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. The heater barely worked. I'd sit beside her, rubbing my hands together for warmth, pretending everything was fine so she wouldn't worry. Back then, I promised myself I'd give her a better life, something stable, something she could lean on without fear it might crumble. I never wanted her to feel the way I felt after her father died, like the ground beneath us had shifted overnight and nothing could be trusted again. That promise became the compass for every decision I made over the next decade. I worked overtime. I saved compulsively. I skipped vacations. And I postponed plans that might have brought me joy. I told myself it was temporary. That sacrifice was the price mothers paid willingly. But looking back, I think I forgot where the line was, forgot that I was allowed to exist. 2. When Jenna met Mark at the hospital where she worked, she introduced him to me with a shy excitement I hadn't seen in her since she was little. He shook my hand firmly, polite and earnest, the kind of young man who made eye contact and asked about your day. I liked him immediately. I didn't know then that his mother would cast a shadow much longer than any of us expected. The night I met Linda Harrington, I'd cooked a small dinner, pot roast with carrots, the kind Jenna always asked for when she was stressed. I set the table with my best dishes, the ones with the faint blue rims that I only used on birthdays. I wanted everything to feel warm, welcoming. comfortable. She arrived wearing a tailored winter coat, the kind with buttons that looked more like jewelry than fasteners. Her hair was perfectly sculpted, her perfume sharp enough to reach me before her greeting did. She walked into my home like she was stepping into a hotel lobby, eyes scanning, cataloging every imperfection with a single glance. "It's cozy," she said, her smile polite but tight at the edges. "This takes me back to my college apartment, though, admittedly, that one had better lighting." Jenna gave me a small smile, the kind meant to smooth things over without actually defending anyone. I swallowed the sting and tried to remind myself that some people simply didn't know how their words landed. When the wedding came around a year later, I stood in the back of the reception hall, watching the chandeliers glitter above the tables Linda had curated. Everything looked like it belonged in a magazine. The flowers, the linens, even the seating cards embossed with gold lettering. I had paid for Jenna's dress and part of the catering, quietly pulling from the savings I rarely touched. But Linda had taken over the details, ensuring that her vision was the one everyone admired. During his toast, Mark thanked his mother for making this perfect night possible. My name wasn't mentioned. I heard clapping, laughter, glass clinking, and found myself smiling because that was what mothers did at their child's wedding. They smiled, even when something inside them sank a little deeper. It wasn't long after the wedding that the topic of buying a house surfaced. Jenna and Mark were overwhelmed by the prices, the down payments, the mortgage approvals. I could see the worry in her eyes when she said, "Maybe we'll have to rent forever." That familiar instinct rose in me, the one that wanted to fix everything for her, to catch her before she ever had to fall. So I offered to help. I said it calmly, as if offering a cup of tea, even though it would drain decades of careful saving. The real estate agent suggested the house be put in my name until they were more stable financially. Jenna hugged me so tightly I felt her heartbeat against my shoulder. She said one of the rooms would always be mine. I believed her. The day they moved in, I painted the smallest bedroom in soft gray and set up a simple bed with a quilt I had sewn years ago. I imagined myself spending quiet weekends there, drinking tea in the kitchen while Jenna and I chatted like we used to. But even on that first day, Linda arrived with a truck full of designer furniture. She stood in the doorway of my little room and frowned. "That chair looks tired," she said, referring to the armchair I'd brought from my old living room. "Maybe it's better in the garage until you find something fresher." Jenna agreed too quickly. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself it was just a chair. But over the months that followed, tiny things began to shift. My Sunday coffee dates with Jenna faded into cancellations. Holidays were planned by the Harringtons, with Jenna asking me to be flexible just this once. My room slowly filled with storage boxes that weren't mine. By the time November came around, I felt like a guest in a house I had paid for. Still, I didn't say anything. I waited for a quiet moment to talk to her, but quiet moments grew rare. She seemed to float around Linda's orbit more and more, as if being close to that polished, perfect world gave her a sense of belonging I could never offer. One afternoon, just before Christmas season began, I saw them by accident. Jenna and Linda were in the holiday aisle of the supermarket, standing in front of a display of garlands and candles. I was about to wave when Linda leaned toward her and said something that made Jenna look down at her shoes. "She means well," Linda murmured, "but your mother just doesn't fit with our side of the family. Everything feels awkward when she's around." Jenna didn't argue. She didn't defend me. She just nodded, a small, tired nod that cut deeper than any sharp insult could have. I turned around and walked out of the store before they could see me. My groceries were still in the cart. My hands were shaking too much to hold on to anything. Driving home that day, I realized something I had been avoiding for months. I loved my daughter more than anything, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing me as part of her world. For a few days after I saw them in that aisle, I carried the moment inside me like a bruise no one else could see. Every time I replayed Linda's voice, calm, poised, cutting, I felt another small crack run through something I'd been trying so hard to hold together. But it wasn't her words that stayed with me. It was Jenna's silence. The way she kept her eyes down, as if agreeing cost her less than disagreeing. I didn't confront her right away. I wasn't ready for the answer she might give, and some truths hurt more when spoken aloud. I told myself she was tired, stressed from long shifts, caught between two people she cared about. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, like mothers do even long after their children have grown. But then came the night she texted me at 3 a.m, and everything I had been trying to swallow rose to the surface at once. After work that day, I drove straight home and sat in my car for a long time before going inside. The sky was already dark, the kind of heavy December night that made the world outside feel smaller. My apartment windows glowed faintly behind me, but I didn't feel ready to step into the warmth. I just sat there, feeling the ache in my chest settle into something deeper, heavier. I took out the house folder. Yes, I kept a folder for it, the way you hold on to the one big thing you sacrificed for. Inside were the closing documents, receipts, insurance papers, and, on top of it all, the deed with my name printed in bold type. I traced my finger along those letters, remembering the moment I signed them, thinking I was buying security for Jenna's future. Instead, I had bought myself a seat outside her life. I held that deed for a long time. It felt like the only thing left that tied me to the version of family I used to imagine. And as I stared at it, another thought, sharp and unwelcome, slipped into my mind. If I wasn't welcome in that house, if I was no longer part of the world inside it, then why was I still carrying the burden for it? Why was I paying the emotional and financial price for a space where I had been slowly erased? The thought scared me. It felt drastic, too big, too final. But once it appeared, it didn't leave. It sat with me like a quiet visitor, refusing to move. 2 days later, I made an appointment with a local attorney named Mitchell. His office was in an old building downtown with creaky floors and the smell of paper that had lived too long in filing cabinets. The waiting room had faded chairs and outdated magazines, but something about it felt honest, unpolished, real. When he called me in, I sat across from him at a wooden desk that had probably been there since the 80s. I slid the deed toward him with hands I hoped weren't visibly shaking. He adjusted his glasses and read through it carefully. "So the house is in your name," he said. "Yes," I answered. "And your daughter and her husband are living there without paying rent?" I swallowed. It was never meant to be formal. I wanted to help them. He nodded slowly. "You're the legal owner. You have full authority to sell, transfer, or reclaim the property, provided you give appropriate notice to the occupants." The word reclaim hit me in a way I didn't expect. I didn't feel powerful or justified. I felt tired, bone tired. He must have seen something shift in my face because he leaned back gently. "You're not obligated to keep supporting a situation that harms you," he said. "I don't want to punish them," I whispered. My voice cracked. "I don't want to be that kind of mother." "It isn't punishment," he replied. "It's a boundary. And sometimes boundaries feel harsh when they're overdue." I stared at my hands for a long moment. "If I decide to sell, what happens?" He explained the process. Fast sales, investors who buy properties as is, the timelines, the notices. He spoke clearly, professionally, but with a softness I didn't expect. When he finished, I didn't answer right away. I needed air. I stepped outside the building and sat on the stone ledge near the sidewalk. Cars passed. A man walked his dog. A woman pushed a stroller. Life went on all around me, and I sat there feeling like I was on the edge of doing something irreversible. It was strange, realizing that choosing myself felt more frightening than choosing everyone else. I had spent so many years being someone's mother, someone's helper, someone's support, that I didn't recognize the woman who was considering stepping out of the role. That night, I spread the documents on my kitchen table again. My apartment was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock. I stared at the stack of papers until the numbers blurred together. And then, finally, I picked up the phone. The real estate buyer I called was part of a company that purchased homes quickly for rental properties. The man on the other end had a steady voice and didn't ask many questions. He told me they could come by for an assessment the very next morning. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. When they arrived, they walked through the house with efficient eyes, noting details, marking things on their clipboard. I didn't go inside. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the windows where Jenna had once waved at me as a child. I kept remembering her, standing on her tiptoes to hang paper snowflakes on the glass. Now, the curtains were different. The furniture changed. The energy altered beyond recognition. The buyer offered me a number. It was lower than market value. Part of me felt insulted, but another part, the exhausted part, was relieved. A clean break. A way to untangle myself from a place that no longer held me. I signed the agreement 2 days later. My hand trembled as the pen touched the paper. When I finished, a single tear fell onto the corner of the document. I wiped it away quickly, embarrassed even though no one else was watching. After the sale, there came the matter of the notice. It had to be delivered properly, legally. I knew Jenna would be blindsided, and the thought nearly broke me. She had always been my soft spot, my reason for everything. But the truth was, she had stopped choosing me long before I ever considered choosing myself. I called Attorney Mitchell again. I asked him to arrange an official process server for the notice. I didn't specify a dramatic moment. I simply said I wanted it delivered on Christmas Eve, when Jenna and Mark would certainly be home. There was a long pause on the line. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, but all he said was, "If that's your decision, we'll proceed." My decision. The words echoed strangely inside me. For so many years, decisions had been made for the sake of someone else's comfort. It felt unfamiliar to hold one entirely my own, no matter how heavy it was. In the days leading up to Christmas, my chest felt tight with dread and something else, something like resolve. I went to work, made my meals, attended my little art class at the community center, pretending everything was normal. But inside, a storm brewed quietly. On December 24th, I baked a pumpkin pie. I didn't know if anyone would touch it, but baking had always been my way of grounding myself. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled my apartment, weaving itself into the air like an old memory of better holidays. When it was time to leave for Jenna's house, I stood at my front door for several minutes, holding the warm pie in my hands. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked older than I remembered, tired around the eyes, mouth set in a line that spoke of too many unspoken things. But there was something else, too. Something steadier. Something that looked like the woman I used to be long before I forgot I had a right to be seen. As I locked the door behind me, snowflakes began to fall, soft, slow, drifting across the pavement like tiny white secrets. I didn't know then exactly what would happen in that house, but I knew the moment I stepped inside, nothing between us would ever be the same again. And that truth carried me all the way to their front door, where the real storm was waiting. Snow was falling harder when I stepped out of their house, the cold rushing into my coat like it had been waiting for me. I stood on the walkway for a moment, pie still warm in my hands, watching the windows glow behind me. Inside, voices rose and fell in confusion, but I didn't turn back. I walked to my car, brushed the snow from the windshield, and drove into the dark, letting the headlights cut through the drifting white. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my small living room with the tree lights glowing softly, casting warm colors onto the walls. It should have felt lonely, but instead it felt honest. For the first time in years, no one needed me to stay quiet to keep the peace. No one needed me to shrink so they could stretch. I held that strange sense of freedom close, even though it came with a deep, aching sorrow. I kept my phone on silent. The screen lit up again and again with Jenna's name. Sometimes Mark's. I couldn't answer. The words I'd said at dinner kept echoing through me, not with regret, but with a painful kind of clarity. I'd spent so long waiting for someone to choose me that I'd forgotten how to choose myself. On the afternoon of the 26th, a soft knock came at my door. I knew it was her. Jenna stood outside looking small in her winter coat, eyes red, face pale. The moment I opened the door, she stepped inside and wrapped her arms around herself as if she wasn't sure she had the right to ask for anything. "Mom," she whispered, sitting on my couch. "I didn't know you were that unhappy." I sat across from her, folded my hands, and waited. She looked at her lap for a long time before speaking again. "I let things get too far," she said. "I kept trying to keep everyone calm, and I didn't see what it was doing to you. I'm sorry. I really am." Her voice cracked, and something in me softened. "I didn't want to hurt you," I told her. "But I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine while I disappeared from your life." She wiped her eyes. "You didn't disappear. I got caught up in what Linda wanted. It felt easier to go along than argue. But that wasn't fair to you. There was so much more we could have said, but sometimes the simplest truths are enough." She reached for my hand and held it tight, as if making sure I was real. Over the next few weeks, I helped Jenna and Mark move into a small apartment across town. They didn't ask for money, and I didn't volunteer. We packed boxes side by side, labeled them with markers, and loaded them into a borrowed truck. Linda came by once and tried to direct the process, but Jenna gently told her she needed space. Linda left without arguing, and for the first time, I saw a shift, small, but real. Winter turned into spring, and life settled into something gentler. I went back to painting at the community center, found new friends, took long walks through the park. Jenna visited often, sometimes with Mark, sometimes alone. Our conversations grew lighter again, real again. 2 years later, on Christmas Eve, I walked into their apartment with another pumpkin pie. This time, Jenna greeted me with a bright smile and guided me to the seat right beside hers. No hesitation, no awkwardness, no distance. During dinner, Mark raised his glass. "To Margaret," he said, "for teaching us that love isn't real unless it comes with respect." My throat tightened. When Jenna leaned against my shoulder and whispered she was expecting a baby, the room blurred with warmth. For the first time in years, I felt at home, not because of a house, but because of the people who had finally learned how to hold me close.